what was I most excited to see brought to life on screen is an excellent question, because it was such an amazing depiction of, as far as we know, Bronze Age life. It was simple, the costumes were great, the settings, we could really, we're in the wine dark sea with them. You just saw the fragility, like, oh my God, they're going to sea in this little craft, and they are at the mercy of, they might say, the wrath of the gods and so on.
I would say the scene that I've been most replaying in my head is the recognition of Odysseus when he's with Eurycleia, the enslaved woman that has taken care of him for his life. The moment where he's taking off his shoes because she's going to wash his feet and she recognizes his scar. To me, that was such a, it really captured that feeling you have when you read the story.
How do you feel about how the film handled the legacy of the Odyssey? And I was thinking about, Homer's works in general. We have this poem was actually written in, say, 650 BCE, but it had been told orally for generations. In the oral tradition, the new teller, they can speak to their own times. They can adjust. It doesn't stay static until it's written. One thing that can happen is people feel it's frozen and there's no changing, and this is the authoritative story. And I think it's much more helpful to think of these as every new depiction is a recreation, and it should be, and it makes it relevant for our times.
I really loved how they portrayed Circe. I thought that the sequence with turning the men into pigs was straight out of a horror movie in a really cool way. I thought that how visceral it was and how strong her arms looked as she was reaching into their mouths to transform and literally shape their heads was a really powerful image, and definitely different than how she's portrayed in the original poem. Less of a sort of temptress sort of witch, and more articulate, more kind of, she embodies sort of a more masculine kind of power in the movie, which I thought was very, very cool and very different. I hadn't expected that.
Even as powerful as Circe is there, you get a sense of victim revenge, that something has happened to her and she is now acting out through powerful magic in some vengeful way. And it felt to me like the women in the movie were either victims or allies, but they were not people of their own story. There were some through lines in the Odyssey that tied all the women together in very powerful ways that didn't exist there. Helen in the Odyssey is this powerful, incredibly creepy woman. And so in the movie, she comes back and she's basically a victim of domestic abuse and has no power there. But in the Odyssey, she basically drugs her husband to keep control.
Penelope, I was not as thrilled about. I thought that Anne Hathaway did a great job in her performance, but I think of Penelope as clever as Odysseus is, and her whole bit about how she's unweaving the tapestry at night just goes by in a second.
A scene still stuck in my head is this thing that doesn't come up in the poem, but might resonate for people, where Odysseus is looking back at his role, largely celebrated role, as being this crafty person who was able to bring down the walls of Troy, having not been able to do it for 10 years. But he's looking at it and thinking about his guilt, which is not something you get in the poem, but is really interesting. Him looking back and being horrified by what had happened.
There's a psychiatrist named Jonathan Shea who worked with Vietnam veterans and who really impacted how classicists see the epics. His first book was Achilles in Vietnam, and his second book was On the Odyssey and Homecoming, and how hard it is for a soldier to come home from war. And that is the focus that Nolan really takes. I do think there's sort of a through line for Nolan of feeling like we're a civilization on edge.
Sometimes after watching the movie, I'll be walking down the street trying to just mind my own business, and I will begin literally tearing up thinking about the destruction of Troy and the fall of Troy as it was portrayed in this movie. This movie wasn't per se a movie just about war. At the same time, I think that the way the Odyssey portrayed the violence, the real-life consequences of conflict, ancient or modern, was powerful. That feeling of, as the world gets more complex and chaotic, we need to rely on each other and treat each other with kindness was one of the bigger takeaways for me with this movie.